Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to the next Edubots webinar. Today we have the honor of welcoming Dr. Tim Coughlin from Open University in the UK as a guest speaker, and really look forward to learn a little bit more about the topic of improving accessibility and how we can create chatbot and conversational experiences with the purpose of making education more accessible. I know that Tim, you have worked with something specific around, if I remember the phrase correctly, disability disclosure. Could you explain a little bit what that is?
Yeah,
introduce yourself at Open University in a few lines.
Yes, thank you, Lars. And it's really nice to have this opportunity to talk to you. Yes, so as you've said, I work at the Open University in the UK. I'm a senior lecturer in educational technology. The Open University is a distance learning, open access institution. And by student numbers, the largest university in the UK. And we also serve a very large population of disabled students who either prefer to study on our model or actually it's the best approach given their circumstances. So I'll say a bit more about that in the slides. But yes, the disability disclosure process is very important, because it's a means to ask students about their needs and to support them properly in study. So it's necessary to create a scenario where there can be equity of study for students by responding to their needs, adjusting curriculum, getting them support technology that will help them, that kind of thing.
That's great. So I think I simply give you the floor here, and then we'll follow up with questions and Q&A and discussions afterwards.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just share my slides, and yes, just to say, I mean, I'm very happy to take this discussion in a few different directions. I know we'll talk about this with a disability or accessibility audience, or an AI audience, or an educational audience, and there's always some interesting questions and things that people have around it. So as I've said, the interest that we have and that I'll be discussing today is around virtual assistants and chatbots for accessibility and disability disclosure. So I will start with a little bit of context from where we work. So in the UK, in higher education, there is around 15% of students who disclose a disability to their university. And that equates to over 350,000 students at any time, and it is a growing number of people. Also, a key point is that there is a gap in the number of those students who attain a good degree, so what we would consider, a high mark in their studies. So there's a recognized gap there that people are keen to address. And it's also important to notice that when we talk about disability, we're actually talking about a lot of different things. So although I could say, okay, there's a gap there, and there's this, you can give people a tick and say, yes, these students are disabled and those students aren't. It's not really that simple, because disability covers a huge range of things, from mental health conditions through to physical and sensory disabilities. So the support those students need is really variable. There's also the issue that a lot of students we know don't disclose their disabilities. So they may have these issues, but they don't tell the university. So some of the statistics are, in that way, underplaying this. But one thing we do know is that, for example, disclosure of mental health conditions has rapidly increased in the UK. university system in recent years. And those students, again, there's quite a gap in their attainment at university. Within the Open University, as I said, we're the sort of largest university in the UK. We have over 30,000 students now who disclose a disability to us. So in some ways, it's larger than a lot of universities, just the disabled students. Our model is quite different with the distance learning, and sometimes people study with us for many, many years. So it's a different thing to compare, but really, it's a massive group of our students, and obviously, therefore, requires a lot of attention. We have a process where the student will kind of tick a box during registration or enrollment to say, yes, I want to disclose a disability. So they're asked at that point, and then they're directed to complete a form, which is quite a complicated form, asking them about their study needs, what disabilities they have, what support they think they will need. And then after that, the next step in the process is that ideally they will have a conversation with one of our advisors. So we have disability advisors who can understand the study and potentially the student needs. All students are offered that conversation either via a phone call or other means, but they don't always respond to take it up. But also it's worth recognizing there's a bottleneck. And this would be the same for most institutions. Everyone registers, for study starting in October or whatever. For us, it's mostly October and sometimes February. And you have thousands of students registering at this time and disclosing disabilities. So although we have quite a lot of advisors, there's a challenge there really to serve everyone. My interest in this and my colleagues' interest in this really came up from some workshops we ran. So we have a disabled students group, part of our Students Association. And we wanted to kind of say, well, what's the research challenges you want us to address? What do you want us to work on? And a couple of the things that came out there were really connected with this. So the first one was the amount of time that disabled students in particular have to spend on administrative tasks. Disclosing their disabilities. They also have government support called the Disabled Students Allowance that many of them will apply for. They may also apply for support in their everyday life. So we have what's called personal independence payments, which is another like government support thing. It's all very complicated to apply for all these things. There's lots of forms. You need to talk to people, get assessments, medical evidence, all these things. And people were saying, look, this is a huge burden on us. And it's not, it's a thing that makes things inequitable because other students don't have to do all this. It's taking all our time. So they wanted us to look into that. And another thing they were pointing us towards was the idea that there's only one communications channel that they can use. So if you imagine a deaf student, there may be a scenario where the only way to get help is to call someone or have a phone conversation. So then actually what they need to do is ask someone to do that on their behalf. So there's all sorts of barriers there around offering different ways of communicating that, again, we thought was an interesting challenge and something people really wanted us to look at in the university. So just to kind of give a brief sense more of what this is like, if you first start applying with the Open University, you've got your sort of application process. You then get this disability support form, which is another form you have to do. You then probably applying for student finance. So that's loans and money to pay for your study and any other associated costs. If you're disabled, you're then probably applying for the Disabled Students Allowance, which will get you some technology and potentially human support as well. If you're then in the university and you have particular needs, you may have to fill in separate forms to get, for example, adjustments to exams, to borrow some equipment that might help you, and to get materials in different formats. There's all sorts of things like that. So that's just within the study context that what the students need to do. As I said, this is, if you're a disabled person in the UK, you're also likely to be applying for personal independence payment, which is a complex and difficult process to get help with everyday living. You may also want things like a blue badge, which is for parking and driving, and gives you some additional help with that. And then you've got everything else in your life, council tax, bank accounts, everything else. So the point is, this kind of administrative burden it's probably something a lot of people face, but it's increased for disabled people, and particularly disabled students. So that's the kind of context we're working in. And when we started to look into this, there's not a huge amount of research into it, but there is some. And some of the issues that people face are, as I've already mentioned, kind of restricted pathways. So there's only one way to do this, to apply for this, and it doesn't work for that person. It's not accessible. Unequal outcomes is interesting. There's quite a lot written about things like buying stuff online. So in one particular case in the US, buying flight tickets online, you get a better price than you do on the phone. But the websites are not accessible to disabled people. So in a sense, that's causing inequality. High effort. There's lots of work involved in doing this stuff. Time dependencies. So you do one process and that then triggers another, or you've got to talk to one person in a certain time. And it's not just a practical thing. What we really got from people and from the research is the emotional issue here, that it's just so much stress, negative emotional kind of responses to it. And yeah, there's more, there's more issues here. There's a lot of processes that happen, as I've said already. So we did a survey with our own students about this, and really, I suppose the headlines were that the processes that are intended to support disabled students are the ones that are more difficult for them. So if you think about it, it makes sense, because if I'm just registering to study or trying to get student finance, it's relatively straightforward. But if I'm applying to get help because I'm blind, then I will be asked for medical evidence. I will have some sort of assessment. People will want to decide what technology or adjustments are correct for me. Those processes are actually the harder ones. And the students pointed out this disability support form that we used was, in terms of the OU processes, was the most difficult one that they faced. And some of the other processes that aren't in our control, they kind of said were harder again, but they're not things we have control over. And as I said before, a lot of this, it's not just the practical issues, it's the stress involved. So people end up with quite a lot of negative impacts from these processes. They also have a poorer impression of the university, they were telling us, so if these things don't work well, then they reflect badly on their opinion of the university. But as well as the kind of emotional and potentially health issues around this, it does mean they've got less time to spend on their studies. And I think about a quarter of our respondents said that doing all this had affected the quality of their assignments. And this is increasingly recognised, at least in the UK. It's recognised as a sector-wide issue. So the Higher Education Commission and various members of UK government commissioned wider work on this, and it came up with essentially the recommendation that we need to do something about administrative burden. So this is just a student view, and it says, it ends up with 6 people from the university contacting me at different times: disability advisor, life centre advisor, academic tutor. And as someone who's dyslexic with a mental illness, this is extremely stressful to deal with, and I can't talk to 6 people at the same time. And I won't go into detail on all of these quotes, but essentially it's a recommendation that the UK HE sector should do something about this issue of administrative burden. Yeah, that's kind of the context of where we're working. So our goal in this project, we'd already identified the problem. We were thinking about, well, what kind of solutions do we think could fit this? And we were interested in the ways that conversations with advisors were really positive things, and also that forums were something everybody hated. So our essential idea was that we would build a virtual assistant, and that this would be something that students with disabilities would talk to, have a dialogue with about their support needs. That would build a profile, and that we'd build this with the participation of our students and staff, so that it was really done in a grounded way, working with them. So as I said, yeah, we started this just pre-COVID, so we had some face-to-face workshops. We managed a couple of those to really think about the early design and get people talking about the process, the current process and their visions and for what things might be in a better world. And then we had student consultants who were kind of paid to work on the project and involved with us more longer term, came to meetings and gave us advice. We then did a beta trial, and the last bit that I'll talk about was a kind of a main trial where we integrated this into the actual disclosure process. So one of the things I think is probably particularly interesting to this group when we started this project was that we're working specifically with disabled students now, and most if not all processes in a university should consider that disabled students are probably going to use them, so they should be accessible. But our goal was to specifically support disabled students, so the accessibility of this was absolutely key. But what we found really was that there wasn't very much guidance or research on chatbots or conversational user interfaces in general about the accessibility of them. There's people sort of suggesting that they can be very positive for disabled people. So if you think about it, somebody who struggles using a keyboard or doesn't want to be sat at a computer, using a voice-based virtual assistant could be a really positive thing, and there's some discussions around that. But actually designing chatbots to be accessible isn't something that's been discussed very much. So we started kind of reviewing this, and we looked at, if you look at kind of web accessibility, there's loads of guidance and standards to address, how do you build a website or how do you test a website to be accessible to the widest possible audience. But that stuff isn't necessarily appropriate to chatbots. They're quite different to a website or a mobile app. So one of the things we've done is to essentially create a series of questions at this point. We don't have enough to go on to create some kind of standard for chatbot accessibility yet, but there's a lot of questions to consider. So some of the things we came up with by reviewing accessibility standards and the needs of disabled people was things like, how is the keyboard focus moved around? So if many disabled people using assistive technology are not using a mouse, and that they rely on keyboard navigation. In website, that's fairly standard, that you make your website so that it can be navigated just with keyboard, like the tab and stuff. With chatbots, it's kind of interesting because you've got the messages coming in, and you've also got the writing the messages as well. So that's an example where how you make that work for a user just using a keyboard is quite interesting. The different communication modalities is interesting. So we were thinking about speech as well as text, and that's really potentially valuable to people, but they have to be able to select their preferences and stuff on that. And the other example was the time it takes people to respond. So you don't really want a conversational interface that will interrupt someone or assume they've finished talking. They may have some kind of speech impairment, or they may need to pause. So these kind of issues. So we've started exploring that, but I think there's a lot more work to do in that area. So now I'll kind of move on to what we produced in the project. And we called the chatbot Taylor, and this kind of came out of a few different reasons. Partly a member of staff who'd been very active in the accessibility space. Partly this sort of connotation that it's about tailoring your study. So we thought that was nice. And also, I mean, we were sort of trying to avoid having a gender on it, but that's not straightforward. But it seemed like an important factor. So there were some discussions and things, and it was interesting how hard actually it was to get people to agree on a name. But yeah, essentially, Taylor is built using Microsoft Azure technologies. Microsoft were sponsoring the project. It starts off really setting the expectations. So what is this conversation here to do? So it makes it clear that you can change anything you've said later on. So, trying to allay any concerns that you might say something that then affects the rest of your study life. So we make that side of it very clear. We make it clear it's just an initial stage in the process. It's not like, this is going to decide everything about the support you receive. One of the things we found really interesting was that people talk about their disabilities in very different ways. But what we need to do as a university is to align them to categories of disability. So, for example, in this case, the student might say, I have dyslexia and blurred vision. So, but in the category terms, that needs to be marked as specific learning difficulties, which includes dyslexia, and sight, which is the category for anything vision-based. So we used the kind of language understanding models to support that, and it's doing a pretty good job of it. I think there's, inevitably there's more training and a wider kind of dictionary of terms and so forth that could be used there. But it's a nice example of how AI can kind of be a bridge between the language that students might use to describe something and the kind of formal terms that the university deals in and has to report. So we were quite pleased with how that worked. One of the other things that was of interest to us was that this wasn't just a one-way sort of questioning. So a conversation with a disability advisor, when we were kind of analysing those conversations, it's very much a proper dialogue. So the advisor will ask a question or talk to the student or provide them with some information. But the student might then come back and ask questions of their own. So we were interested in making sure that this replicated that in some way. So it was, in a sense, gathering information about the student, but also allowing them to learn something and to query anything they wanted to do. So it took a bit of time to get this right, because I think naively we assumed that kind of changing that direction would be straightforward. But we got there in the end. In a sense, we combined the sort of qualities of a Q&A bot with a conversation going in the other direction, which is the sort of scripted conversation that we have. And we made it very clear that the student can always ask questions. So to make this really clear, we kind of always had a button at the bottom of when they were asked for a response, which was ask a question. But they can also just write, can I ask a question, that sort of thing in the box. But yeah, there's some challenges around that kind of thing, because I think a lot of bots, either do one thing or the other. They're either about Q&A or they're about kind of transactions and gathering information from people. So that was an interesting challenge. Hopefully we got some way towards getting through. And yeah, I think part of the goal there was that the student learns something through that conversation, so it's beneficial to them in a way that completing a form wouldn't be. So I think that's one of the advantages here. You know, so by asking questions, they will, if you imagine these are new students, so often they don't really know very much about what study is like, what support they might be able to get. So it is a good point to try and build their understanding. And, you know, some of that you can just deliver as part of the conversation, but obviously allowing people to ask questions is a really good element of that. And as I said, one of the other key things was that people get to check the information they've provided and change it, and, you know, and make sure that that is accurate. So there's a summary that this produces from the conversation, which can then be, once the student is happy with that and the conversation is ended, that output can then be shared with our disability support advisors, and it's recorded. And kind of, in a sense, the goal we achieved here was to replace the form with this assistant. So that's what we've done. And you know, at this stage, it's not about replacing the advisor conversation at all. It's really about doing a better job of that step with the form. So I do have a video that I can show. The only issue will be if I try that, whether the sound will come through, but I'll
let's try it out.
Yeah. Let's see. I mean, if you don't hear the sound, you still get the sense of how this is working.
Hi Nick, I'm Taylor, a virtual assistant, and I'm here to help you get the right support for your studies.
I don't know if you can hear any sound there.
Before we get started, are you happy with the speed I'm talking at? Say yes or no.
Yes.
To help you have the best possible study experience, I'm going to ask you some questions. Your answers will help me build a summary of the support you need. You'll be able to review and change your answers at the end of our conversation, so don't worry if you make a mistake or forget anything. Would you like to watch a short video about how we support students with additional needs? Say, watch the video, or move on.
Ask a question.
What would you like to ask?
Is my tutor told about my disabilities?
Based on your responses and the outcomes of any conversations you have with our advisors, we will make a profile of your needs that will sit on your student homepage. Your tutor will be able to see this profile to help understand how they can support you. If you have any other questions, you can ask me now. Otherwise, press continue and we'll move on. About you. The OU uses the word disability to cover a lot of things that you might not think of as a disability, such as health conditions, autism, dyslexia, depression and anxiety. With this in mind, can you tell me a bit about any disabilities or study needs that you have?
Yes, I have a stammer and a prosthetic hand.
From what I've understood, I think these categories apply. Speech and manual skills. What?
So I'll stop that there. But yeah, hopefully that gives you a sense of the system, and it's kind of you know, I think there's a huge potential in this, and there's obviously some design challenges that we faced and things like that, and there's a lot more to do. But yeah, so our goal in this project really was to produce a system that we could put in front of students and trial it, you know, in a realistic way. So we did that. We in a sense offered this to students when they disclosed that they could take part in a trial. And what we did was to ask them to do the assistant and fill in the form, so that we could ask them for their opinions comparatively. So that was them really, actually disclosing disabilities. It was new students doing it, so it was realistic in that sense. And we counterbalanced it, so they either did the form first or the bot first and things like that. So we tried to do the best job we could of a trial here. And what we found was, that a majority of students, 65% of the students preferred using the virtual assistant. So we were really happy with that. They preferred that to filling in the form. So it was interesting, there were still some students who said they preferred the form, and some who had no preference, but it's definitely an interesting result for us and very positive. Why did they like the assistant? Felt more friendly, having the prompts, asking questions, not having to type as much, people were saying. Concise and kind of, it's interesting how in a conversation you kind of break things down, so you're only focusing on one element at a time, whereas the form can feel very overwhelming. So this was just some more examples of the feedback. People liked the fact that there was audio and text options, and we even used video, as you might have seen. Less intimidating, things like that. So I think there's kind of, again, sort of emotional reasons why people like this and they don't like doing forms. I think a lot of people just have an aversion to forms. But there's also some practical benefits potentially here too. Why did they prefer the form? The ones that said that was kind of interesting to us. I think a lot of it is things we can fix. So it was that the knowledge base was limited. This was kind of, people would ask a question or they'd say something and didn't get a coherent response. That was off-putting, as you might expect. One of the things that was interesting actually is some people felt that they could write more on the form, and they felt that the assistant had almost kind of was pushing them for an answer, perhaps, which wasn't really the case. I mean, they could take as long as they liked, but it was interesting to get that feedback, that some people said, oh, I prefer the form because I can take my time and write as much as I like. So, again, I'm sure there's ways we could respond in the design to address that. But yeah, so I think there's areas for improvement, but overall it was very positive. And we also got, one of the questions we asked people was, what more did they want the bot to do? And the main one, which we were already hoping to work on, was that it would make suggestions to them of the kind of resources and tools, based on what they were telling us about their disabilities. And then the second one was to help them complete other forms and processes. So, the sort of grander vision here, of course, might be something that you talk to the assistant once, and then maybe come back to ask it some extra things, but then it can help you with all these different processes you have to do. And yeah, being able to answer more questions, these kind of things. So we've got some steer about where we'd like this to go. And yeah, I mean, just to round off, really, I think for us, we're a good kind of test bed for this kind of thing, because we've got so many students disclosing disabilities. But I think it's, most universities will have challenges in this area, and we've spoke to probably 5 or 6 universities now who've kind of been interested in and said, yeah, this sort of area is problematic for us and it's interesting. We really didn't focus on the idea of replacing people with a bot. That was a real big thing for us. It was about those advisors were on board with the project, and they recognized that, they spend a lot of time doing repetitive, saying the same things to students, and also dealing with the fact that some students just won't talk to them, won't communicate with them. So, it's augmenting their work, really. That's where we're thinking, and I think that's a nice way to think about these kind of assistants. But of course, there might be some other scenarios where people don't have access to an advisor, and an assistant like this would be the main source of guidance. So that's really interesting. And as I've said, there's a lot of other processes that people do, you know, where maybe, you know, maybe forms should be a thing of the past, and we can have virtual assistants and bots doing everything for us. So I think I'll end there, but, you know, very happy to have a discussion. Anything interesting.
Excellent. So that was a lot of interesting things in there. I got a couple of questions myself, but let's see if there's any thoughts or questions among the participants here today. I'm curious to hear if accessibility has been a topic at different institutions. For example, I know AFTAB with Bolton College and Bolton University been working a lot with chatbots. Has accessibility been a big topic for you?
Yeah, yes, throughout the whole project. We did some experiments with voice first services back in 97, 98. So we launched iOS and Android apps and an Alexa skill for Ada. We don't have the resources to continue on that work, but students did cite that a voice-enabled service was a huge help, especially with students with motor skills issues and they couldn't access a keyboard or mouse. So with students with visual impairment, they said the voice interface trumps basically the text input on the screen.
Yeah.
We've also been experimenting lately with the use of a digital avatar as well, whether or not that actually enhances the experience to the students. But Tim, I love the work that you've been doing. The interface is lovely, and I know it's early days for you yet, but I think there's a huge amount of potential for what you're doing.
Thanks. Yeah, we do too. Yeah, and I think it's good to get experience of people who are, you know, doing work with chatbots in universities more widely. You know, student support or you know, as you say, you know, the voice angle of it is really nice for some students, and hopefully something, you know, where it's just a preference. You know, they can talk to the university or they can type. You know, so there's a lot of potential there. But yeah, I think the thing we found really was just that, you know, whereas in other situations you can point to standards and say, okay, this is how you build a website. You know, we're not there yet with these systems, but obviously we will get there.
Speaking of voice, there was a kind of practical question that was triggered by your demo when we heard the voice of Taylor, and I was curious to hear your thoughts on kind of screen reading tools that are able to read out the conversation, or if it's more a chatbot capability of speaking. If you understand the difference.
It's built in to it. So it's using an Azure service to deliver the speech. Yeah. So I mean, in our mind, you've got different scenarios. You may have a student who has a screen reader, has that software, and they use that software, and in which case they wouldn't use our speech mode. Probably. I mean, it's, you know, personal choice, but they would use the normal text mode. Perhaps, you know, so it's a preference. But yeah, other students wouldn't have that technology because, you know, they may not actually be used to using a computer in that way or studying with a computer or anything. So so and also, I mean, one of the other interesting things is people might want to speak but then read off the screen, or they might want to listen but then type, you know, so you can actually offer all those potential options, which, as I say, it's potentially very positive for the accessibility of it.
I think your presentation and your project highlight perhaps the importance of flexibility and personal choice for students to interact with the computer. So I think we're kind of used to a model where one size fits all, and with consequences in terms of accessibility. And I think the best examples of accessibility efforts is where services have been redesigned and making things more accessible for everyone, not the smaller subgroup of people that have explicitly disclosed their what do you say, their disability.
Yeah, there's an interesting, there's different ways of thinking about this. Some people will talk about kind of universal design and approaching things so that a student can use it without having to ask for help or support. I think that's always an ideal, and you can go, a certain distance with that. We tend to find, we do a lot of things, for example, with online learning, we can produce materials in different formats or to download, and you can do some of that automatically. So the student doesn't have to ask for it; it's just there. If they want a Word document of this materials or whatever, and then obviously there's things like providing alternative text for pictures and things like this. So if you do it, it's helpful, and nobody has to kind of ask for help. But there's still a lot of situations where an example might be an exam. If you've got an exam, we make adjustments for a student with dyslexia or something, so they get a bit more time, and that's it's a different kind of thinking about how do you make things fair. But yeah, so there's two I suppose approaches or philosophies at work there. But yeah, the more you can do to just help everyone. We've seen this with like captioning. Captioning videos is essential for someone who is deaf, but actually it's really good if you don't want to hear the audio, you just want to read it. You can get a transcript or something. That loads of students benefit from that.
Yeah, that's cool. Sorry, I just have to close the window. There's some maintenance here.
JP's got his hand up as well, Tim.
Okay, yeah. Please come in.
Thank you so much. Everything was great, but what blew me away was when Taylor started talking. So I'm really interested in the speech to text fact, and then I immediately thought, but would it understand me? Because Siri certainly doesn't understand my South African accent. And then on top of that, we Lars, to answer your question, the accessibility isn't so mandated yet in South Africa, but I'm very interested in it. And these hooks from this webinar is very strong. But we are struggling with something like multilingualism. Not struggling, but that's kind of a vision for us. So I was wondering, Tim, if you could respond into how easy it would be to make Taylor also a multilingual bot by just activating the machine learning, whatever of Azure. I don't really know how it works. Just maybe some comments on. Yeah. Because certainly not all UK students speak the Queen's English, so no. Was that an issue that came out of the research? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, it certainly was on our mind. So for context as well, we, the Open University is also present in Wales and Scotland, and, and we do have international students, of course, as well. So there's, so it's kind of reliant on Microsoft and how powerful their systems are. You can create these kind of custom voice models and things, but that's more appropriate. So if you're using specific language terms and things, it's not so much about accents and stuff. So I think this is something, that there's a wider interest in kind of AI bias. And one of the issues here is if you take British English or American English or Spanish, say, for example, I think the speech recognition is really good as long as you speak in a sort of vaguely standard way, because they've got huge amounts of data for those languages
right.
that is drawn on to be accurate in the recognition. Technically, you can use Welsh language, but if I had to guess, I'm not sure it would be incredibly accurate with a Welsh speaker, because I imagine they don't have a huge database for that. I think our experience was it did pretty well with things like a Scottish accent.
Right.
But yeah, it's a bit of an unknown. In terms of multilingual, in theory, I mean, Microsoft, I'm sure, if you see things like Google Translate as well.
Or
there's
Microsoft Translator, which is excellent.
Yeah.
I've discovered it the other day. So, I mean, there's hope for the future,
services.
but
Yeah. I mean, that's the same services that this uses, is
All
used
right.
in Translator. So I imagine there would be quite a bit of refinement and stuff. But if you said, hey, I want this in Spanish, it's not like you'd have to rewrite the whole thing. I think you could you could achieve that. But yeah, there's definitely.
Thank you very much.
Just a comment, if I may add. I think this discussion around multilingual support and dialect support is just highlighting some of the importance of cross-institutional collaboration. And the larger the scale of these type of initiatives, the more opportunity to really use some of the new artificial intelligence solutions to train those models. So otherwise, they would rely on investing in creating multiple knowledge bases in multiple languages, where the student or end user will select what dialect are they using to give certain input.
Yeah, and another issue I would mention is things like speech impediments, or people, again, it's an accessibility thing. And I know Google have funded some projects around this. So again, the answer to some extent is building a database of, speech samples for any particular speaker, and they've been doing that with people with particular kinds of speech impediments and different ways of speaking. So it's again, we ran into, as I think I mentioned, what would happen is in our initial version is if you paused, the assistant thinks you've finished very quickly and it kind of moves on. So we had to put in this sort of additional code to try and make it a bit more patient with the speaker. But yeah, there's all sorts of things there that need investigation. Yeah.
Tim, I've got a quick query about the workflow. So the end goal for the interaction is to complete this virtual conversational form that you're engaged with. What happens if a student wanders off topic? How does Taylor bring back the student to topic?
I mean, in a sense, so going off topic would mean asking questions in this situation. So, largely it will, answer your question and then kind of say, do you want to ask another one, or do you want to continue? I think we recognize that not every student will complete the conversation. So in essence, it will always just save whatever's been said. And that material will go to the disability advisor team, but it's obviously with a caveat that it was incomplete. But yeah, I think there's two things I mind here. One was that students might leave and then want to come back and carry on talking, and it's quite basic at the moment. As I say, we kind of save everything, but they can just start the conversation again. I think in the future it'd be much more a better memory. But yeah, I think the only way it can kind of go off topic is if the student keeps asking questions. And they can do things like go back to my answer for, if they see the summary, they can say, I want to change my answer to part 2 or something like that. I think, scripting conversations is hard work, actually.
Yeah. Did you have anyone with that skill set, with a conversational design, involved in the project, or was it yourself and your colleagues? Giving it your best.
We talked to a few people about it, partly through Microsoft as well. We had there was a book I read, I think, from some IBM people, I think Ericsson or somebody like that, that was quite interesting. We did kind of mocked up conversations, like Wizard of Oz style, where you pretend it's a bot, but it's not really a bot, and kind of got students talking to us and, sort of practicing it. But no, we didn't have expertise directly in it. But we were kind of given some guidance on methods and ways, and we had lots of students and staff to work with, so that helped. But it's a challenging area for sure.
Did you ever? I know you operate with many thousands of students, and you said you could possibly get 1,000 applications or form fillers every single day. Do you have a handover process we can hand over to an advisor?
Not in this bot, because actually what would happen is it triggers a call anyway. So it was interesting, because a lot of people assume that the bots always sort of have that mechanism. But for us, it was, I mean, if they wanted to, if they said, can I call up the university, it would give them a phone number to ring. But that wasn't the model we went for, because at the beginning of the conversation, it says, a disability advisor will contact you within 10 days or something like that. So it was interesting, because we didn't work with that approach, which obviously, is quite common for these bots. Yeah.
But it becomes very hard when you're operating at scale and you've got many hundreds of applications every single day. It's
a matter of the team have a list of people to contact, and they work through it, and they try to book appointments with people and so forth. But like I said, I mean, if people want to ring up, they can, but you've got general student support teams, and then you've got specialist disability advisors, who are obviously a more limited pool of people, and that's the people who ideally they will talk to about this.
Is the workflow different for returning students, so second-year students, third-year students, or students who are on postgraduate courses and coming back to the OU?
It's I think they're prompted to complete the form if they want to update. So in the same way, it's not somewhere we've quite developed yet, but the idea would be they come back and just update information. So hopefully, you save a bit of effort there. So if people's circumstances change, which obviously does happen with health conditions and things, then ideally they'll come back. Yeah.
So I think there's quite a few insights here from this project that we can take away and implement in all types of chatbot projects that we're involved with. And I think just having accessibility in mind when designing conversational experiences, and perhaps the right term for that is the universal design of universal conversational design.
That sounds good, doesn't it?
And something else that has struck me is what you mentioned initially, that basically everyone hates forms.
Yeah.
So this highlights an opportunity for chatbots to fill a role of adding flexibility and adding choice of engagements with the computers. And I think this field of human-computer interaction is on the rise, and interaction with chatbots and robots and that's kind of a new area where we're engaging with speech, for example, as a new field. But I'm intrigued, and we have a final raised hand. Let's give Dominic a chance here before we wrap up the session here today.
Yeah, well, sorry I came late because I have that sort of the time zone issue. It was sort of 2 o'clock, but it's 2 o'clock in Europe, and I did.
Welcome, Dominic. Could you introduce yourself?
The last point, and I'll watch the recording. Maybe I'll have some questions for Tim later if you don't mind. But I wanted the last point to say everybody hates filling out forms, but I'm not sure that is true. I often hate chatbots because I say, just give me a form. I don't need to wait for your answer. I just give me a form and I'll just do it, because sometimes it's so obvious. And it really kind of depends on what the chatbot is doing. So I had this experience of returning an Amazon item. And actually it was a brilliant experience because it did the looking up for me and just it seemed to reduce the steps over filling out a form instead of cognitive overload. But most of the chatbots that I've used, where they sort of ask me like, how are you? So I don't care, just get me the stuff that I need to get done. And so it's more like, it's very contextual. So do we have some sort of research or some evidence for that everybody hates filling out forms?
Well, I think it was an oversimplification from my side to make the point of that added flexibility, and just as you say, giving that choice to the end user. And it's quite hard to determine in advance what's the best for everyone.
Yeah, I think there's I mean, one of the things I would say from our point of view is, it's the complexity of the form, and also do you understand the questions you're being asked in the form? Is something to think about, because in this case, I think we felt that the students, because they're new, they don't know what study's like, they don't necessarily use a computer very much, and things like that. So that is also an element of it. Can you help them add value in explaining the questions or these kind of things? But yeah, it needs more research. I think our results were positive in this case, but there were still some people who said, no, give me the form. And I don't know if you maybe weren't there for that bit, but one of the reasons that this sort of minority was 25% said, I prefer the form. They said that it was, one of the reasons was that they felt they could take more time and write more detail in the form. And there was no actual reason why they couldn't write the same amount in the bot, but they felt like it was different, so. But yeah, there's definitely more to do there.
It makes good sense that would be more stressful for some people, because like somebody's waiting, even though it's nothing is waiting, but it feels like there's something waiting for. And I have that as well. I exactly know what you mean. What happens? What happens if you walk away from a form for half an hour? It's still there, but if you walk away from a chatbot, so maybe that might be something to signal, like take as long. I have all the patience in the world. Take as long as you need, or stuff like that. But it's also the linearity, having the freedom of going. I'm just going to skip this field and come back to it later. Having a sense of the overall picture. So my example for this is bus timetables. So it's much easier for me now to know exactly what is the next bus, or what is the bus at 5 o'clock on Saturday. But it's much more difficult to answer the question of, when do buses generally run around here, right? Because I'm not seeing that big chart, and that doesn't give me. So sometimes having that old style timetable that shows me everything gives me that bigger picture. And also people with disabilities, or they have sort of a stress and anxiety, and so not knowing what comes next may be more stressful than having that form. So that would be quite interesting to kind of know a bit more, and maybe see if you can give them more flexibility as part of the chatbot process. Like, just give me a form now, or something like that. That would be quite nice. Yeah,
I think it's not a kind of black and white question, but I think there's a lot to learn from comparing, so you give people a form, give them a bot, which that's what we tried, which do you prefer and why? And yeah, like you say, there's a lot of nuance, different questions and things that better in one, better than the other.
So I hate stopping lively discussions and conversations here. So we have one more raised hand.
Yeah.
So if you have the time, let's see. Imane, would you like to ask a question or add to the discussion? You can unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for this invaluable conversation. What my concern is the privacy issue. It's true that some people who have disabilities find it very easy to interact with chatbots and to disclose to a machine part. There is another issue of privacy, and that might give more stress, because whatever there is online, there is kind of issue of privacy, of their data. So are there any measurements to protect their data?
Well, yeah, I mean, we went through the usual sort of processes around data protection in our university. So on a technical level, yes, it's controlled. They authenticate through their student login and all these kind of things. I think the other side of it really is just the messages you give, to make it clear what's happening, because essentially the information they share is sent, but only to a specific team, the advisory team. So so I think that it is really important. Some people, in other ways, they don't like talking to people about their disabilities. They're actually kind of happier if they can avoid talking with a real human being about them. It's kind of interesting that it goes that way as well. So yeah, there's different levels. I think one of the key things is sort of transparency of where's this information going to go. And then, of course, on a technical level, we need to ensure privacy and recognize, this is the person that says it, who it is, and so forth. And then it's much like any other system. The student can log in, they can see their profile, using kind of standard methods. Yeah.
Thank you for that final question, Iman. It's always an important aspect to have in mind. So with that, I think we conclude the webinar for today, and we do have our Edubots community where I hope all of you are members. Let me share the link in the chat in case you haven't joined yet. So that's a space where we can kind of continue the discussion and also get to know each other a little bit. I just share that with you in the chat, and in a couple of days I will also publish the recording of the session, and there's quite a few webinar recordings now on our YouTube channel. Just search for Edubots EU. So with that, thank you, Tim, for joining us, and with the project going forward. I'm sure we will hear much more about it.
Thanks, and yeah, thanks for all the interesting questions and everything else. That's been really great. Okay.
Thank you, and have a nice day.